MacKenzie, for coming and joining me here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so just to introduce MacKenzie to everybody, MacKenzie is a communications and a digital marketing director, having worked at some prominent companies like Harper's Bazaar, NBC Universal, Telemundo, Paramount, and worked on great brands like FIFA and NHL. But maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yes, so I am truly, really, it's a privilege. It's an honor to be on your podcast. You know, it's always fun when people are like, hey, I want to bring you to my audience. So for everybody out there, I'm MacKenzie Greene. I am currently the VP of Social for Who, What, Where. So I oversee, for those of you that may shop our clothes, Who, What, Where, the brand, as well as Who, What, Where, the media company, both US and UK, which has been incredible. But I had kind of a longer career prior to this, where I worked everywhere from NBC Universal to Telemundo Deportes to Betches Media. Prior to this role, I was at BET Plus, one of the founding team members for the BET streaming service, did my undergrad at the University of Miami. I did my MBA at Columbia Business School. And so I'm an incredibly proud Cane and an even prouder Lion. But yeah, that's kind of the short version of it. But I've had a really incredible career in kind of this world of media and entertainment, everything from print to obviously streaming to linear to film. And it's really just been this constant through line of storytelling. That's really where my passion is kind of telling stories, whether it's through silly memes on the internet or through more crafted 360 campaigns for, you know, the next Tom Cruise film at Paramount.
Well, speaking of storytelling, let's get into it. Let's talk about, so as I mentioned, my hobby horse is learning how to learn. Learning is a skill, and that learning is like when we're working in this world that is like in media and startup world, the growth trajectories of the companies and the people within them. I mean, everyone is just strapped on and like, you know, on these incredible meteoric learning curves. And we need to get better at learning, right? So we need to get smarter at learning. Figuring out how we can learn smarter and faster is critical to our happiness and being able to thrive in work. Well, how do you feel about learning? How do you learn best?
I mean, learning has been an interesting, so I'm one of those kids, I grew up, you know, dyslexic, and I grew up with ADHD. And so, yes. And so so learning was a struggle, but it was a team sport. I was lucky enough to have parents that kind of were like, hey, we're going to help advocate for you. We're going to work here with you. You know, I had my mom and I laugh. She would go to the teachers, get the reading list for the next school year, a year in advance. And we would spend time. She would get a copy. I'd get a copy. We go through them as slowly as much as we needed to so that it sunk in. I have, you know, I tell anybody that listen, I definitively hate Jane Eyre because I think I read it like 8 times in my academic career and hated it every single time. You know, please don't at me if you are like a huge Bronte sister stan, but learning was always kind of this scary thing to me, right? It came with, you know, test pressure, not knowing how to read something out loud for the class, whatever it was. Then it felt like I got to adulthood. You know, I got to college, and that was the first time you really get to pick maybe classes you like. And what I found is in picking classes you like, you were really picking classes that went to how you learn. So more visual, more kinesthetic, you know, an opportunity to not have to work off rote memory, but instead being able to like experience and engage with the text. Then you get into the real world of your first job and you're like, what was the point of school? Like, I am not using any of these things in the way that I was told I'd be using them. And then to go to grad school, it was kind of like to get plunged back into this classroom environment. And I think that was a real wake up call where I was like, all right, you know, it's my decision to figure out how we're going to do this. Like, this very neurotypical way of approaching an academic experience is not going to be your jam. And I'm really grateful for kind of this world of like the Jim Quicks of the world and the Scott H. Youngs that kind of speak on this world of like meta learning and ultra learning, because somehow that made sense to me. So I was pulling out this quote that I love. It's this Einstein quote. It says, wisdom is not a product of schooling, but of a lifelong attempt to acquire it. And then this Jim Rohn one that says formal education will make you a living, self-education will make you a fortune. So it was like, when I got out of grad school, I actually started to build through these people that I really admired this kind of intellectual curiosity and this self-learning curriculum that has been very fascinating and strange at times. It has led me to everything from like memory competitions to teaching myself graphic design so that I'm more useful in my role as a digital marketer. But learning is like the scary L word, but like knowledge is now what I've replaced it with to be less afraid.
And so tell me, first of all, yes, I've got a house full of dyslexics and non-typical learners.
Oh, I mean, the day I learned neurodivergent, and I'm a big superhero nerd, like the day I learned the word neurodivergent, I was like, I'm an X-Men. Like, why did anybody, if somebody had said it to me as like, you're neurodivergent, I would have been like, I'm a superhero. I have magical powers. You're welcome, everyone.
It's really, it's a disservice. We do a disservice to so many young people who feel like they just are not capable of learning,
Yes.
that they're dumb.
So much of my life was spent being like, well, I'm obviously not that smart. Meanwhile, I'm surrounded with proof that that's clearly not the case, where I'm like graduating in the top of my class at Miami. I go off to Columbia Business School. I get all these great accolades there, but I'm still standing there going, well, I'm not very smart. I'm not really well read. And it's like, says what?
No, it's crazy. It's just crazy. And the fact that the skills like that, I mean, we learn a lot of stuff in school, but we don't learn how to learn. Let's talk a little bit about the memory.
Yes. That when people talk about like, oh, if I can do it, anybody can do it. This is really one of the things that I'm like, if I can do it, anyone can do it. So this is going to seem convoluted, but I swear it makes sense. So when I was in college, I had been a very decorated swimmer my entire childhood, adolescence, like teenagedom. Had to retire unexpectedly when I got to college through this kind of, as I like to call it, quarter of a life crisis. On the eve of my 20th birthday, people were like, what are the things that you want to do now that swimming is over? And like among the things were like run a marathon, compete at Miss USA. I have run now 3 marathons. I was Miss DC and I was in the top 20 at Miss USA my year. So truly, I had proof that I could do impossible things. So I say all this to say, I am the kind of person that will like watch somebody do something, turn to my family and friends and go, I think I can pull that off. That's something. Because again, like what I learned in swimming, which is similar to what I've kind of translated to learning, is like, everything can be broken down. You can reverse engineer anything and kind of get to the end of it. So pandemic happens, lockdown is going, sitting in my apartment, I'm on Netflix like everybody else. There's a Netflix documentary called Brain Games, and it is about memory athletes. I had a grandmother who dealt with dementia, who slowly was this great storyteller that was the keeper of all the memories and all the recipes in her mind, and they were going. And so I was very fascinated as I watched this guy, Nelson Dellis, who had like a very similar story of kind of having this grandmother. And he was like, I wanted to keep up with my mind. For some reason, I watched that doc and thought, I mean, they're saying anybody could do it, but like, can anybody do it? And so then I picked up Moonwalking with Einstein by Josh Foer. Same thing. He's like, I'm an average guy, figured out how to do this. And so I genuinely sat down, like, I got lucky, there's a few resources on the internet, websites, and I go into figuring this out. I gave myself a year. My poor parents were here visiting me when the USA, like a year later, the USA championship is happening. I'm sitting here, I got my headphones on, I'm doing cards, I'm doing the images, all this stuff. Day ends, I go into their room and I was like, I didn't do that great.
And you were in the competition.
I was in the competition like a year after. Yes, a year after watching this documentary, I saw when the qualifiers were going to be for the USA Championship. So these were kind of like where they were going to pick the top 12 that then competed in Orlando for like the massive championship. I go into my parents' room, I was like, I didn't do that great. Like, could have done better. My POA system wasn't that great for images, but for numbers, but I did well in images. So my mom goes, well, where'd you finish? And I was like, like in the top 25. My dad was like, let's just pause for a second. You mean to tell me a year after watching a documentary, and you will tell anybody that will listen that you have the worst memory ever, that you have a mind like a goldfish, that like, oh, I got ADHD, I can't focus on anything. He was like, you mean to tell me a year after watching somebody do the thing, you just finished in the top 25? And I was like, yeah, but it's not. I was like, but the 12, and he was like, no, let's stop and like acknowledge this. And so it was learning all these incredible techniques that I think for somebody like me, learning that all memory technique really comes down to visual was the most encouraging thing. Because when you have ADHD, which it's like when you have that neurotypical mind, or neuroatypical, you are like seeing images, you're able to draw on things, it's like you're reading a book and the whole page comes to life. And so for me, every technique coming down to creating these kind of visual mental pictures, which also weirdly tied to what they teach you in pageantry on how to answer questions, was incredibly encouraging. And, memory competitions, one, taught me like really your mind can do anything, but two, that like that skill of learning, that the first step was just learning how to set your memory up right. And then from there, you were kind of like deploying it for those drills and that, repetitive practice.
What it says to me too is that like when you have a goal, so this is one of the things like with Skillpod, what we say, we've got four key competencies of learning. And one is knowing how you learn best. And we've got like a little matrix of like different quadrants of learning, knowing how you learn best, having growth mindset, believing that you can learn if you put the effort in, and in using resources in your network and whatever it is, like figuring out all the different things, like not being afraid to ask questions and all of that. Setting a goal, like having a goal and figuring out, working backwards from your goal to define the scope of what you need to learn in order to get there. And finally, then learning from failure. And so, what I see in that is that you are very, very well attuned to how you learn.
I think that's applauding my mom. Like she was this person that the minute a specialist was like, well, she has a learning difference, my mom was like, great, bet. All right, now let me go figure out what all of that means in relationship to my child, rather than talking to her like she's dumb or like, well, sweetheart, or like giving her the space to feel like she's going to fail. It was kind of like, all right, we're going to figure out how this works best for you. And so, yeah, I mean, she's taught me about myself as I've gotten older, and obviously the academics have fallen more on me, but yeah, every step you just listed is like my thing. I mean, my family to this day, if I walk into a room and I'm like, hey guys, I think I want to do blah, blah, blah. Like if I come in and say like, I want to do pottery, my cousin is like immediately goes, oh, great. All right. So are we like in a competition next week? Or I recently got bored and I said, oh, I'm going to teach myself sleight of hand magic. And my cousin goes, yeah, why? Because we're going to be on America's Got Talent next year. Because it's just this teasing thing that like, I never am saying things as, oh, I'm just going to like run a marathon. And they're like, which one? I'm like, oh, New York City. I worked all year to qualify. And they're like, I thought you hate running. And I'm like, I do, but I figured it out. And it's just, it's a running family joke.
It's a challenge. Yeah, we'll beware world. When MacKenzie feels like there's a challenge there, you're going to go out and achieve it. That's amazing. And speaking of like failures, how did failures play into your learning?
Oh, I mean, you want to talk about like bumping your head. I have had some hard hits, but I think I was lucky to have mentors, coaches, and family that taught me it's not a failure. You're just learning a new boundary. You're learning a new space. Like you're kind of testing where you can and cannot move through, or maybe how you need to like take it from a new iteration. I think one of the biggest things I always think of is like my first year when I swam. I like to call it like my egg timer moment, but ultimately I was so awful on the team my first year that the coach gave me a gag gift. And it was at our big award ceremony. So like, of course, little kids are getting prizes. And then I was called up on stage and given a not real award. It was an egg timer. And it was like a joke of being like, oh, you're so bad. Here's a fake award. And so I remember being so sad and crying so hard. And I remember my parents, who are very, very nurturing any other time, it was kind of like, but do you think you did your best? And I remember thinking like, well, I try. And it was like, no, but if you truly think you gave it something. So I think to me, that's the first thing that failure really taught me is like, if you have done absolutely everything in your power, everything that is truly within your control, and it didn't turn out the way you want, you can only be proud of that. But if you walk away and you're like, oh yeah, I did kind of half-ass that, but I thought I could get away with it, then you can't. You can only kind of like reckon with yourself. And then I think one of my professional lessons that failure has definitely taught me is like slow down. I used to always think to prove that I'm not dumb, I'll do it faster than everybody. I'll ask the least amount of questions and I'll do it the quickest. And in reality, there's so much power in just being like, I don't know. And I actually need more time than you're thinking because I don't even know the right questions to ask. So, failure has been an incredible teacher that I think without it, I don't get to any of where I am now.
What about, how does that translate? Like, so thinking about learning and failure in the workplace, because that's a really scary place to be, right? Like nobody wants to feel like they've really screwed up and nobody wants to feel like a failure. And then if you're not willing to kind of allow yourself to feel like a failure, you're only going to push yourself so far and you hold yourself back and then you're not really actually growing. So it's all like intimately tied. And what about, I don't know if you have any experiences or thoughts about failure and learning in the workplace and experience, like something you can share. That's
absolutely. I had a brilliant idea when I worked for a media company that I was like, on this particular holiday, I've got an idea for like a specific artist that we're going to work with and they're going to take over the account. And I remember I had already talked myself into this idea that everybody was going to say no to it. So rather than fully go with like a full pitch, I was like, I can kind of do enough to please this person, but also put it on our channels. And in the process of doing that, did not please the artist and did not please the company. And it was like this thing that I thought was such a brilliant idea. I don't think truly I let it have the fair shake that it needed to succeed. And when I tell you, like, even now, I have like the professional cringes where I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe oh God, that was such a bad idea. Like, it's not so much that I never want to sit in it and dwell and be like, oh, you failed. But like, I can say it should have been a smashing success, but I don't know because I didn't truly do everything with it that I think could have made it that brilliant thing. And so more so it's like, that is a constant reminder to me of like, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And if it fails, it fails. Like nobody watched it, nobody was into it, but don't half do it to please one person, half do it to please another. And then when it fails, you're just sitting there going, I wonder if I had just executed the idea that I had and been willing to like stand on the carpet for it, I would have maybe not be sitting here years later being like, ugh, when I think about it.
Yeah, no, it is so, that's such a real example. And I mean, we all have so many failures we can pull from. What about something that was like a challenge that you thought was like, no, I can't do this? And it sounds like there are a number of challenges in your learning adventures, but a challenge that you thought you couldn't overcome and that you did, or that you were able to kind of get through. And what was it that helped push you through that point of like, this is impossible, no, I'm just gonna get through it, do it?
Corporate finance in business school. I cried through the midterm. Like, I don't know if fail is even the right word for how I tested on that, but I remember looking at the test and laughing. And I remember thinking everybody here knows the answer to all of this. Like everybody here knows all of this. I know nothing. I should have known all of this before I got here. And it was a twofold thing. The assistant dean said to me, you have to look at this as learning a language. Nobody expects you to be fluent in the language, but we want you to be able to order off the menu and be able to get through this place. And so that so coming out of bombing that test, that helped. And then asking for help and truly finding like an advocate. For anybody who is a current student, especially in college or grad school, lean on your TAs. My professor was like, yes, you failed. You are a lost cause. But that TA was like, I think I can do this. I think I can explain this to you in a way that makes sense. And I truly, even now, I'm like, if I ever see that man, like I joke all the time, God willing, I get to write a book about my life as a businesswoman and all the success. I was like, I will talk about that man in that book. Like some lawyer will have to hunt him down to be like, hi, apologies. She has written an entire chapter about how you like took all the, complicated jargon out of it. Like he really taught me to not be afraid to ask dumb questions, where he really was like, no, if you don't know why this is two, say that makes no sense. And it was so much confidence he built in me to just ask questions that the next time I went into class, I didn't feel silly. And then I would have classmates pull me aside on the side and go, I'm so glad you asked that because I didn't know it either. And I'm like, what are we doing here? What?
And then if you take that kind of and extrapolate that into the workplace, because school, at least you're supposed to be asking questions,
Yes.
right? Like, so has it changed the way that you, you interact in meetings or the way that you work in the workplace? Has that kind of carried over?
When I know my ego is getting out of control in the workplace is when I know I don't know an answer to something. Instead of just saying, I don't know, I'm like, well, we'll figure that out. Well, we got this plan. And then I'm running to my team being like, hi, so we have to execute XYZ campaign in 2 weeks. I genuinely write in my bullet journal at the start of every workday, like ask more questions than you have answers. And, I can tell sometimes managers have been like, I'm sorry, you don't know the answer. Like, I am the first one to be like, I don't know. I don't even know what question to ask. Like, and I think I would rather be that person where people are like, wow, she sure does ask a lot of questions. Or like, she is real quick to tell you, I have no clue, but if you give me some time, because what I've learned through the process of memory training and my other instances, I can learn anything. So if I don't know it and you give me, depending on the timeline, time to familiarize myself, build better questions, talk to other people across different teams, maybe tinker around with them on my own, I'll come back to you with an answer. But I have learned, do not lie when they ask you and be like, I'm like, first be like, no, I have no idea. I don't know, but I'll find it out for you.
Yeah, I see this in the workplace all the time. People are still like very nervous about like asking, like, I'm not sure even what that acronym is. And like somebody will Slack message or like, I Slack message and say, what are they talking about? I have no idea what they're talking about right now. I think it's okay. So now the question generally is, what do you think are your strengths and how can, what are 3 tips that you would, out of our 7 skills that we have in Skillpod, what do you feel like are your strengths? And do you have 3 concrete tips for sharing with other people so that they can help build that skill as well? I feel like we may have narrowed down our choices into one skill, but I'm not going to put words in your mouth. What do you think are, out of our 7 skills, what do you think is your greatest strength?
I mean, people might be like, no, that's not what I would have picked for you. But I think connecting with people, I think that is a skill of mine. I think if I were to give a concrete version of it, it is to schedule informationals, reach out to people across your company, other companies, but not for the purpose of wanting a job. I think there's something so funny to me when I reach out to like a peer that does what I do at like Pinterest, and they'll be like, oh, we're not hiring. I'm like, no, I'm not leaving. I want to, because really I like networking, meeting people, having these conversations, because I learn what I don't know talking to somebody else. Like in that conversation, they could throw out a piece of tech or throw out a strategy idea or talk about the way that they're framing their business or even just the way they relate to their team. And I'm like, wow, I don't know that. Thank you so much. Like that was incredibly valuable. You know, I can't wait to go work from that. Say another one is goal setting. I think I'm a very strong goal setter. And I think my big tip to people is like, let's pretend it's running a marathon, like work backwards from the marathon. I think too often it's like, so I want to run a marathon. So day one of training, I will run 13 miles. It's like, well, no, what are all the bits and bobbles that you use? Like find yourself a vision expander, like look at people that help you kind of put together this reverse engineering of like, what are all the steps, both, you know, running and everything I need. So I think that's something I'm strong at. And then I think the last one is, I hope that I have my other strength of my intellectual humility. I am very aware of what I don't know. I learn something I knew I don't know every day. I am constantly reminding myself of what I don't know. And I hope I never lose that ability, because I think it's like another Twain quote where it's like, keep your shore of ignorance in sight. Like I like to see in front of me everything I don't know so that I can continue to be reminded you don't know everything, so stay humble, but there's more to grow. So don't ever be scared that this is as far as you'll go.
Oh my gosh, it doesn't really get much better than that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It has been amazing talking to you and learning so much about how you learn. I mean, I think that you really exemplify how to learn smarter and faster in a way that I think is really inspiring, very inspiring.
Seriously, thank you. Well, I mean, it's truly a privilege, and I think I'm so excited our paths crossed.
All right. Well, take care, and yeah, and I hope that our paths will keep crossing.
Yes.